Good morning. The world has become markedly more turbulent in recent weeks. Events are moving fast, and in moments like this, what matters most is being clear about the values and the interests that guide us, even as circumstances change. The United Kingdom has a long history. Our values were not improvised. They were built patiently over time. And while we are pragmatic in how we pursue our interests, we are resolute in defending those values when it matters. So let me begin with the United States. The UK and the US are close allies and close partners. That relationship matters profoundly, not just to our security, but to the prosperity and the stability that people here depend upon. Under President Trump, as under previous presidents, we're determined to keep that relationship strong, constructive, and focused on results. And that approach is delivering. Through sustained engagement, we've seen significant US investment into the UK economy, running into hundreds of billions of pounds, supporting growth, skills, and jobs right across the country. Our cooperation on defence, nuclear capability, and intelligence remains as close and effective as anywhere in the world, keeping Britain safe in an increasingly dangerous environment. We've secured good trading terms in key sectors, including cars, steel, aerospace, and life sciences, protecting British jobs and manufacturers. That is why we take the approach that we do, because it delivers concrete outcomes in the national interest. I talk regularly to President Trump, and my team is in daily contact with all the key figures in his administration. These relationships matter. They deliver concrete outcomes in the national interest. Mature alliances are not about pretending differences don't exist. They are about addressing them directly, respectfully, and with a focus on results. On Greenland, the right way to approach an issue of this seriousness is through calm discussion between allies. And let's be clear, the security of Greenland matters. And it will matter more as climate change reshapes the Arctic, as sea routes open and strategic competition intensifies. The High North will require greater attention, greater investment, and stronger collective defence. The United States will be central to that effort, and the UK stands ready to contribute fully alongside our allies through NATO. But there is a principle here that cannot be set aside, because it goes to the heart of how stable and trusted international cooperation works. And so any decision about the future status of Greenland belongs to the people of Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark alone. That right is fundamental, and we support it. Denmark is a close ally of the United Kingdom and of the United States, a proud NATO member that has stood shoulder to shoulder with us, including at real human cost in recent decades. Alliances endure because they're built on respect and partnership, not pressure. That is why I said the use of tariffs against allies is completely wrong. It is not the right way to resolve differences within an alliance. Nor is it helpful to frame efforts to strengthen Greenland's security as a justification for economic pressure. Such measures hurt British workers, British businesses, and the British economy. And that is why I've been so clear on this issue. A trade war is in no one's interest. And my job is always to act in the UK's national interest. That is why yesterday I spoke to President Trump, to European leaders, and to the Secretary General of NATO to find a solution rooted in partnership, facts, and mutual respect. Because that is how strong alliances protect shared interests. The same is true on other issues. In the Middle East, we welcome President Trump's focus on sustaining the ceasefire in Gaza and moving on to phase 2. We are open to participating constructively in such efforts. On Ukraine, I can be brief. We strongly support efforts to bring the killing to an end and secure a ceasefire as soon as possible. We recognise President Trump's role in pushing that process forward. And we will work closely with the United States, Ukraine, and our other allies to apply pressure where it belongs on Putin. Finally, let me say why all this matters so directly to people here at home. In today's world, geopolitics is not something that happens somewhere else. It shapes the cost of energy, the price of food, the security of jobs, and the stability that families rely on to plan their lives. When war drives up fuel prices, it's households who feel it first. When supply chains fracture, it's small businesses and working people who absorb the shock. And when instability grows, it's rarely those with the most power who pay the price. That is why this government's approach is rooted in a simple belief that we must use every tool of government, domestic and international, to fight for the interests of ordinary people. At home, that means active government. It means taking responsibility for economic stability so that inflation is controlled, interest rates come down, and family budgets are protected. It means stepping in where markets fail, strengthening resilience, and ensuring that global shocks do not always land on the same people in the same places, the people least able to withstand them. That's why we've taken action to reduce energy bills, to freeze rail fares and prescription charges. But tackling the cost of living today also means engagement beyond our borders. It requires shaping the world around us, not retreating from it. It requires strong alliances, steady diplomacy, and rules that reduce uncertainty rather than amplify it. That is why our commitment to international law and to alliances founded on trust is not abstract or ideological. It's practical. It's about stability, predictability, and fairness. The conditions that keep prices down, jobs secure, and economies resilient. That is what active government looks like in an age of uncertainty. Steady at home, engaged abroad, and always focused on protecting the people that we serve. Britain is a pragmatic country. We look for agreement. We believe in partnership. We prefer solutions to slogans. And we will not indulge in commentary and gesture politics that harm the British people. But being pragmatic does not mean being passive. And partnership does not mean abandoning principle. That is why it's important to be clear about who we stand with, what we stand for, and where our interests lie. Now, this is a moment for the whole country to pull together. So I warmly welcome the support we've had with regards to Greenland and the proposed tariffs from the leader of the opposition. I thank her for her support. At moments like this, there will always be people who reach for the performative, who think an angry social media post or grandstanding is a substitute for hard work. That's an understandable instinct, but it's not effective. It never has been. It may make politicians feel good, but it does nothing for working people whose jobs, livelihoods and security rely on the relationships that we build across the world. So to conclude, we will work with our allies in Europe, across NATO and with the United States. We will keep dialogue open. We will defend international law. And we will use the full strength of government at home and abroad to protect the security, living standards and future of the British people. That is the approach I will take as Prime Minister, and that is the responsibility that this moment demands. Thank you. I'm now going to take some questions, and I've got a fairly extensive list, you'll be pleased to know. I'm going to start, with Chris Mason from BBC News.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Chris Mason, BBC News. This is clearly incredibly difficult. What more in specific terms can you tell us about what you plan to do now? It appears that you're ruling out retaliatory tariffs in the UK. Can you confirm that? And would you consider going to see President Trump face-to-face this week? Thank you.
Well, what I'm going to do now is to focus on our national interest and be absolutely clear that that requires us to be clear about the principles that we apply to a situation like this, in particular that the future of Greenland is for Greenland and the Denmark Kingdom, and that tariffs should not be used against allies in this way. In relation to the escalation, look, a tariff war is in nobody's interests, and we have not got to that stage, and my focus, therefore, is making sure we don't get to that stage, and that's what I'm doing at the moment. Thank you, Chris. Beth, can I come to you?
Thank you. Prime Minister, many people watching this at home will have been shocked and angry over the weekend that our so-called closest ally is threatening us if we try to stop him illegally annexing Greenland. Is this the most serious crisis in the transatlantic relationship in decades? And how can the US remain our closest ally when it's bullying us like this? And just on tariffs, you say they are completely wrong and it will hurt the British economy. But if Trump does go ahead, to be clear, are you telling the British people that we will have to take that economic pain? And are you planning retaliatory tariffs if that happens? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Beth. And firstly, to underscore your point, this has been very badly received across the United Kingdom. We're allies of the United States, and we work with them, and therefore I'm not surprised by the reaction that's been across the United Kingdom, and it is a very serious situation. Our job is to ensure that we find a way forward consistent with our principles and our values and consistent with our national interest. And the US remains a close ally on defence, on security and on intelligence, on nuclear capability. We work very closely with the United States, and we must never lose sight of our national interest in that. But we must stand up for our values. We must be clear about the principles that we are applying here, and we'll continue to do so. On the question of tariffs, a tariff war isn't in anybody's interests, and therefore what I want to do is to avoid a tariff war, because it will be businesses, workers and families across the country that will be hit by a trade war. And therefore, I will do as I've set out, which is to engage with our European allies, with President Trump. And Chris, in response to the second part of your question, I spoke to President Trump yesterday, as I think you all know, and I'll no doubt speak to him again in coming days. Continually, our offices talk all the time, but we must find a pragmatic, sensible, sustained way through this that avoids some of the consequences that will be very serious for our country. Thank you very much, Beth. Robert Peston.
Robert Peston, ITV. Prime Minister, your entire approach is predicated on the idea that Donald Trump is amenable to reason and respects the rule of law, but it's patently clear that Neither of those assumptions are true. So when will you consider some kind of economic retaliation through tariffs? And will you talk to the monarch, to the king, about not going to America to celebrate 250 years since independence?
Well, Robert, this is a serious situation, and as I've said, threatening tariffs on allies is the wrong thing to do, completely wrong. And a trade war is not in our interests, and therefore my first task is to ensure we don't get to that place, which is what I'm focused on at the moment and will continue to focus on. In relation to wider issues, I don't want to lose sight of the central goal here, which is to avoid the seriousness that a trade war would bring. In relation to your broader point, we do have to remember at all times that it is in our national interest that we continue to work with the Americans when it comes to defence, to security and to intelligence. Our nuclear deterrent is our foremost weapon and deterrent when it comes to securing the safety of everybody in the United Kingdom. It's my primary duty. And that requires us to have a good relationship with the United States. But it doesn't mean, as I said a moment ago, that we pretend we don't have differences. We do have differences. And I've set out some of those differences here this morning in relation to Greenland. Differences of opinion in terms of who should decide the future of Greenland. I'm very clear in my position in that. And differences of opinion on the use of tariffs in a situation like this. And again, I've been very clear saying they're completely wrong. So we apply our values and we seek a solution that's in our national interest. Thank you, Robert. Chris Hope.
Chris Hope, GB News, Prime Minister. Donald Trump says he no longer feels an obligation to think purely of peace. Is now the moment you must choose between the US and the EU? Is this a fracturing in your special relationship?
Firstly, I don't think it's right for us to choose between the US and Europe. That's not a new position today. That's the position I've consistently held, as have previous governments, because we are allies with our European partners and allies with the US. And the strength in being able to keep both those alliances has served us well over the last 80 years. So this is not a moment to sort of choose one between the other. I have argued, and this is not an argument for the first time today, and I've spoken to European allies and leaders about the need for Europe to step up and do more in its own defence and security. I feel that over many years we've not paid enough attention to what we European nations can and should do in our own defence, and this reinforces why it's important that we do that in defence and security. And defence and security these days, of course, includes energy and resilience and cyber, as well as the traditional defence and security. Europe has to step up into that space, and that's an argument I've been leading on and making for a number of months now with our European partners, and will continue to do so. Thank you, Chris. I've got Gary Gibbon from Channel 4. Gary.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You say that Donald Trump remains an ally, but a lot of people would look at his behaviours and say he's not remotely behaving like an ally. Is there anything he could do that would make you think he was no longer an ally? Or is it just unthinkable? Are we totally locked in? And just one other, if I may, some puzzlement that those forces, quite limited military personnel that went to Greenland, that he interpreted that as a hostile act. Do you have any sense that he might have been misinformed about that in entire expedition?
Well, taking the second bit first, if I may, that is one of the things I discussed with President Trump yesterday in relation to those forces which were clearly there to assess and work on risk from the Russians. And so there's real clarity, I hope, about that. In relation to the relationship, we must never lose sight of the fact that on defence, security, intelligence and nuclear capability, we work very closely with our US allies, and it's in our national interest to continue to do so. That doesn't mean pretending we don't have differences, and I don't think anybody could suggest I'm pretending we don't have differences. I'm spelling out what those differences are, what our principles and values are, and how we approach them. But we do continue to work with the Americans. The situation in the Middle East is fragile. There is a ceasefire. We need to move to phase 2. We mustn't lose sight of that. In Ukraine, we've been striving for a just and lasting peace for a long time now. We're 4 years into that conflict. It is in our interest to work with others to bring about that just and lasting peace. The last thing we should do is to simply throw all that away and pretend that it doesn't matter anymore. It does matter. But we don't do that by pretending we haven't got differences. We do have differences, and I'm spelling them out here this morning. Thank you very much, Gary. I've got Kitty Donaldson from iNews. Kitty.
Prime Minister, the US Supreme Court is due to rule next week on whether the tariffs are legal for the President to use. Do you think it's worth just biding your time until next week? And secondly, I don't think you answered Robert's question, which was, do you think the King should go to the United States this year?
I'm not going to comment on the Supreme Court ruling. I think it's due out reasonably soon. But I don't think it would be sensible to simply wait for the court. It's really important that we act now in response to the threat of tariffs, and that's why I spoke to President Trump yesterday and to numerous allies across Europe, many leaders during the course of yesterday afternoon, Secretary General of NATO, and will continue to do so today because it's in all our interests to act swiftly in relation to this matter. Look, in relation to the King and other issues, as I said in my speech, I'm focused on the pragmatic response here, not the suggestion of others, and my focus is on what's in the national interest for our country, what is going to best protect workers, families, businesses, and I believe that's the approach that I've set out. Thank you, Kitty. I've got Craig Munro from the Metro.
Craig Munro from Metro. You spoke about the cost of living in your speech there. How can you be sure, how can you reassure people that the cost of living will improve in the UK when our economic picture is so reliant on an unreliable ally in an unstable global world?
By taking the approach that I've set out today. Some people appear to make the argument that what happens internationally is irrelevant to the cost of living issues that are faced across this country. I'm well aware that for all the volatility in the world, and we've seen plenty of that in the first few weeks of this year, the issue that is of central concern to families and communities across the country is the cost of living. Wherever you go in the country and ask people what their number one concern is, they will say it's the cost of living, and therefore we have to address it. We address it in a number of ways. Firstly, by taking the measures to stabilise the economy so that inflation coming down, interest rates coming down, and protecting family budgets is crucial to that. By being active where markets fail, stepping in on energy bills, rail fares, prescription charges, etc. But also by working relentlessly on matters that are international, because the impact of what's happening internationally on what's happening domestically is obvious, it's real, it's probably more direct now than it's been at any time most of us can remember, and therefore it would be to a dereliction of duty on the cost of living not to be engaged on the international stage. Thank you very much, Craig. I've got Jason Groves from the Daily Mail. Jason.
Thanks, PM. Your Danish counterpart says NATO can't survive one member, the biggest, seizing the territory of another. Do you agree with her? And separately, are you willing to join the President's Board of Peace, and are you willing to pay for it?
Well, look, in relation to the Danish Prime Minister, as you would have anticipated, I spoke to her on Saturday night, I spoke to her again yesterday, and made absolutely clear our position on who decides the future of Greenland and the use of tariffs, and we're completely aligned on those issues. On the question of NATO, it is in all of our interest to make sure that NATO remains strong and stable. We had a very good NATO summit last year with more members than we've had before, with more unity than many people thought we would achieve. And NATO remains the single most effective and successful military alliance the world has ever known. And so it's in all of our interests to make sure that nothing is done to weaken NATO. On the question of the Board of Peace, look, we're supportive of the measures that are being taken across the Middle East, particularly the ceasefire. I do think we need to press on to phase 2. We've indicated our willingness to play our part, and we will. And on the Board of Peace, we're talking to allies about the terms of the Board of Peace. Thank you very much, Jason. I've got Lizzie Buchan from the Daily Mirror.
Thanks, Prime Minister. The head of the UN says that he believes that the US thinks its own power matters more than international law. Do you agree? And secondly, if I may, you've repeatedly promised to deliver a Hillsborough law, but the bill was pulled last night. Are you confident you can win back the support of families, and can you guarantee it becomes law before the end of the summer?
Yeah, thank you, Lizzie. Well, look, in relation to your first point, I've put my argument in my way, in my own words, and that's my approach, rather than sort of commentating on what others have said. On Hillsborough, as you know, I care hugely that we get this right, that we right the wrongs for very many families who've been let down, and ensure a better future for families in the future. In relation to the duty of candour, we've been clear that that matters. What we're now trying to do is just make sure we get the balance right when it comes to the application of any principle to the security and intelligence agencies. Obviously, I have to focus on the national interest, my primary duty as Prime Minister, which is to keep this country safe and secure. That is the duty I hold above all other duties, and I take it really seriously, which is why we're just taking time to make sure that we get that balance absolutely right. Thank you, Lizzie. George Parker from the FT. George.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You mentioned in your joint letter the risk of a downward spiral if this issue isn't resolved. I just wondered if you could explain what you meant by that. And linked to that, do you think it's regrettable that the EU is talking about the possibility of serious trade reprisals and therefore risking a trade war?
Firstly, what I meant by the downward spiral is the potential for this to cause huge damage for the UK, whether that's in a trade war or the weakening of alliances. And I do not want to see that happen. That doesn't mean that we put to one side our principles and our values, quite the contrary. We're very clear about what they are, which is why I wanted to have this press conference this morning and to affirm those principles and values that we apply. In relation to the EU, look, firstly, we're coordinating very closely with the EU. I spoke to a number of EU leaders last night. I spoke to Ursula von der Leyen last night and intend to do so again either today or tomorrow, so that we're closely aligned. There's proper unity and coordination in our response. They will decide exactly what they will do next during the course of today and the coming days. But we're working very closely with them, very closely coordinated. And they were among the calls that I was engaged on for most of the day yesterday. Thank you, George. And then can I go to Ben Riley-Smith, Telegraph? Ben.
Prime Minister, Donald Trump and his team hint at military action in Greenland. Do you think that's a genuine possibility? And secondly, if I may, you are under pressure from some quarters to increase defence spending quicker than you've already planned in the coming years. You yourself are accepting the threat picture is changing almost weekly now. Would you consider increasing defence spending quicker than planned?
Sorry, the very first bit of your first question, I missed the first
action.
Yeah, what's the question there?
Do you think Donald Trump is genuinely considering military action?
Look, I don't, actually. I think that this can be resolved and should be resolved through calm discussion, but with the application of the principles and values that I've set out in terms of who decides the future of Greenland, and making clear that the use of tariffs in this way is completely wrong. On defence spending, we've obviously set out our plans for this Parliament, and we made commitments at the NATO summit in relation to going beyond that, and we stand by them. I have made the argument that Europe needs to do more on defence and security. Partly that is a question of defence spend. I think European countries are and need to spend more on defence. It's also a question of coordination and collaboration, because it's how we spend what we spend that matters as much as how much we spend. And that's part of the argument that I've been making to European allies. If the Ukraine war has taught us one thing, it's that by having different capabilities in different countries in different ways, we haven't actually been able to be as effective as we might otherwise have been if we'd coordinated in years gone by. And I think it's really time for Europe to be much more united, much stronger on this issue. And that's one of the arguments I've been leading on and making to allies and leaders for some consistent and considerable time now. Thank you very much. And then Andy Bell from Channel 5. Andy.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Isn't the conclusion from all that's happened up to now that you've been too soft with the President? And isn't the lesson we have to draw from what's happening now is that you have to start being tougher with him?
Well, Andy, I don't agree with that assessment because taking the approach we've taken has yielded hundreds of billions of pounds of inward investment into the United Kingdom. That's hugely important for our economy and for jobs and businesses and the economy more generally. We are involved on a daily basis when it comes to security, defence and intelligence sharing, daily, 24/7, in relation to the interaction on intelligence between the US and the UK is the closest relationship of any two countries in the world. And that keeps us safe in ways I can't explain to you, but I can say very clearly it keeps us safe and is vital to every single person who lives in this country. And of course, before we got to the better trading arrangements on cars, on pharmaceuticals, etc., many people were urging me not to take the approach that we did, but we did take the approach we did and we got better trading terms. And that's why I'm taking the approach I am to this situation, to ensure that we focus on what's in our national interest. Thank you, Andy. And I've got Peter Walker from The Guardian.
Thank you.
Peter.
It's been widely reported this morning that the Norwegian Prime Minister has received a message from President Trump, basically saying the President is peeved because he didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize. Whilst I'm sure everyone watching this will fully understand why there is a need for the UK and US to kind of keep collaboration and links so close, can you understand why some voters look at what President Trump does and says and think, are we actually serious? Can we actually get anything from him? And if I may, I know that no policy has been announced yet, but from a personal point of view, do you think it would be a good idea for social media use to be restricted for younger people?
Yeah, just I completely understand why what President Trump said about tariffs over the weekend has been so badly received in this country. I completely understand that. And I think that's understandable. And it's important that that is met with me setting out, as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, what our principles and values are in response to that. And not pretending that we don't have differences. Because strong, respectful alliances require the maturity to say where we disagree. And on this, we disagree. And I've been clear about that, and I've spoken to the President about it, and will continue to do so. But I do emphasise, whatever the understandable reaction of the British public over the weekend, it is on defence and security and intelligence and nuclear capability, manifestly in our interests, to have a strong relationship with the United Kingdom. Our nuclear capability is our single most important deterrent, bar none. And that has helped keep us safe for many, many years. On the question of social media more broadly, look, I think we need to do more to protect children. And that's why we're looking at a range of options and saying that no options are off the table. We're obviously looking at what's happened in Australia, something I've discussed with the Australian Prime Minister. I don't think it's just a question of social media and children under 16. I think we've got to look at a range of measures. I'm particularly concerned about screen time for under 5s, which is not so much about social media, but about literally screen time and the impact it's having on children when they arrive at school. So I do think we need to look across the range, but in direct answer to your question, do we need to do more to protect children when it comes to social media and screen time and associated harms, then yes, we do, and that's why we're looking at a range of options. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.